Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
Dear students, welcome to Insight Academy. In today's session, we are going to have a discussion of your GS mains test paper of Indian Polity and Constitution. The questions of this test paper were framed from the syllabus given to you in your test schedule. And I'm very happy to see your test copies. Most of you have written very good answers. I'm glad to see your effort. And keep doing the same, because if you keep working hard, the success for you will not be very far away. Let me start with the introduction. This test paper has 10 questions, and these questions are 5 each from 2 patterns. Some are 150 words, some are 250 words. All of you have to keep in mind the word limits every time. Because if you have a question of 150 words, try to ensure that you write something around 150 words. If you have 250 words, again try to ensure that you are not breaching the limit by a very wide margin. These limits are given so that examiner could see that you can put your answer within the limited resources, within the limited space, within the limited number of words which are allotted to you. Everybody can write very big answer, everybody can write very short answer, but when you have to follow limit in a particular case, that becomes a tricky issue. Questions have been drafted from the syllabus, which was shared with you in your test schedule, and most of you have written very good answers. As I just said, some of you did not use bullets, did not use points. While writing answers in general studies, ensure that you use maximum possible bullets and points, because bullet point format answer can be easily absorbed, can be easily compared by the examiner. Whatever the model answer is given by UPSC, examiner can compare your points and can get you the marks which you deserve. Always incorporate charts, map, some kind of diagram, some kind of pictorial representation to make your answer interesting. You have to ensure that your quality is good and your answer is presentable, far more attractive than others. You have to be good, you have to be different. Ensure that you meet both the conditions. Let's start today's session with first question here. Despite the fact that Constitution safeguards, certain caste groups remain trapped in unclean professions such as manual scavenging. So manual scavenging has been a blot on the face of Indian democracy. What is the point of having a democratic political system if some members of our family, some citizens of our nation are still made to indulge in manual scavenging? So manual scavenging here, first thing, you have to understand what is the meaning of it. Discuss the fundamental rights violated in such cases. Examine the constitution and legal measures or safeguards available to address this social injustice. Social justice is a very important part of your syllabus. Look at paper 2 of GS. You have polity, governance, and you have issues related to social justice. Whether you take governance issues, whether you take right issues, whether you take social justice issues, such questions are going to fall in any of these, or in fact all of those categories. So the topics which are covering multiple different segments of syllabus become very, very important. So you have to pay special attention to that. What is manual scavenging? I start with the definition, write a crispy definition. Manual scavenging refers to involvement in unclean professions such as cleaning of drainage, septic tank, or activities related to handling of dead animals. So still in many cities, machines are not available. Human beings are used to clean drains. Human beings are used to clean the public toilets. Human beings are made to clean the septic tanks, the tanks which are used in dry toilets. So these kind of activities are referred as manual scavenging. These are unclean tasks, and these tasks are often burdened on certain members of Indian society, Indian community, or these are generally handled by the scheduled caste groups. So that is a major problem here. If anybody and everybody is involved in a particular profession, even if that is, say, dirty profession, that will not be a source of that great humiliation. But if a profession is unclean and that is burdened on certain members of our society, certain citizens are made to bear that burden, then that becomes a kind of continuation of traditional social discrimination, traditional sufferings which were caused by untouchability and other such evils in past. So in spite of the fact that Constitution guarantees protection against untouchability, in spite of the fact that Constitution mandate was followed by Untouchability Offences Prohibition Act in 1955, it was further amended in 1976 by enacting PCRA, Protection of Civil Rights Act. All these kind of provisions become insignificant, become useless if certain citizens need to indulge in manual scavenging. So question here says, what fundamental rights are violated? Have a look at the fundamental rights violated. Article 14 provides for right to equality. If certain caste groups, certain sections of society are made to indulge in manual scavenging, that is a violation of right to equality. Everyone does not enjoy the same right to clean profession, same right to clean acts of livelihood. Article 15, prohibition of discrimination. Again, it involves discrimination because these things are burdened on certain segments of society. This is a discriminatory practice. This violates Article 15. So these are fundamental rights. Article 14, Article 15. Article 17, abolition of untouchability or protection against untouchability is further violated because these people face a kind of social discrimination, social stigma, not only in the department, not only in the kind of office they work, but also in wider society. Right to life and dignity. So right to life and liberty, Article 21, involves right to a dignified life, right to a dignified means of livelihood, as per the interpretations, as per the verdicts of Supreme Court. So that right to life and liberty, Article 21, is also violated by the profession of manual scavenging. So this is a kind of modern evil practice. This is against the basic norms of dignified life, and therefore it must be suppressed in every possible way. What are the constitutional and legal measures available? Constitution provisions, you have fundamental rights, protections granted by fundamental rights, and fundamental rights are further protected by the force of Article 226 and Article 32. Under Article 226, a person facing the breach of his fundamental rights can approach High Court. Under Article 32, the person can approach Supreme Court. So, special protections granted by Article 226 and Article 32 are available if somebody is made to indulge in such unclean professions. Then you have provisions of DPSPs, Article 38, 39, 46, providing for a dignified livelihood, providing for social security, providing for a right source of earning, providing for redistribution of resources. So these articles you have to count and you have to write. And whenever you write here, because polity will require a reference of specific provisions of Constitution, polity will require the reference of specific cases of Supreme Court. So you have to have those cases of Supreme Court, you have to have those articles of Constitution with you so that you can use them to support your argument. Without constitutional provisions, without verdicts of Supreme Court, or without specific cases in which Supreme Court gave relevant verdict, answer will not be fetching marks. Then we have the 1993 law, Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry Latrines Prohibition Act. This was enacted in 1993. This was having loose provisions. This could not be enforced on ground strictly because it did not prohibit manual scavenging completely. That limitation was rectified 20 years later in 2013 when new act was enacted, and under the provisions of new act, manual scavenging is not only completely prohibited, it is a punishable offense. Anybody forcing someone to indulge in manual scavenging, cleaning of drains and toilets can be punished. And this act of 2013 is a strong measure against this evil practice of manual scavenging that has been going on in different parts of our country, even till the very recent past. So these are the safeguards available. Mention all of these in these questions where you have multiple issues in one question. Always use headings and subheadings. Start with a brief introduction. No need to put heading before introduction. After introduction, couple of lines, put a heading. What is the meaning and definition of manual scavenging? What are the violation of rights? And what are the safeguards available? What are the legal and constitutional measures which are available in our country? Question number 2. Do you agree with the view that making directory principles of state policy legally enforceable would serve the needs of poor better than fundamental rights? Now, in such cases, you have to have a kind of close understanding of the purpose behind fundamental rights and purpose behind DPSPs. The purpose of fundamental right is to ensure that every citizen has access to a dignified life. Individual liberty is protected. Person has access to certain basic rights which are required for a dignified life, which are required for active participation in political administrative system. And DPSPs are larger objectives which are required for social and economic justice. Fundamental rights primarily focus on political justice, or you can say political rights, cultural rights, religious rights. DPSPs focus on socio-economic aspects, so that we have to understand what is the key difference between the two. Fundamental rights are justiciable. You can approach courts, high courts under Article 226 or Supreme Court under Article 32, but DPSPs are non-justiciable. You cannot approach court to get their enforcement. All these DPSPs you should know, because in such question you have to quote from specific constitutional provisions like Article 38, Article 39, 39A, 40, 41, 42, 43, 43A. All these articles you must know. These are the provisions of Part 4 of Constitution. Because if you know these articles, you can use specific references to support your argument. Just writing anything without supporting your argument with proper constitutional provisions or Supreme Court interpretations will not be fetching you marks. Come to the point once again. So question here says that should we make fundamental rights a kind of secondary, or DPSPs should be given prominence over fundamental rights? Argument is not bad. Argument has validity. And once argument has validity, you have to see to what extent it's right, to what extent it's wrong. So, fundamental rights define what is the purpose. Fundamental rights are included in Part 3 of Constitution. These rights were incorporated in our Constitution on the lines of American Bill of Rights to ensure that every citizen is protected, every citizen is free from discrimination, every citizen has basic individual right, individual safety, such as privacy. Every citizen has right to life and liberty. Every citizen has a right to practice faith. So you have to have rights to speak, right to have faith, right to have your culture protected. These are for dignified life. Because without fundamental rights, no proper dignified human life is actually possible. If you look at DPSPs, DPSPs are the larger objectives. These are ideas and principles which were enshrined in our constitution, and the purpose was to act as a guiding principle for governments. Governments are supposed to keep these DPSPs in mind whenever they formulate their policies, so that social and economic justice could be ensured. Political justice too, social justice and economic justice. That's the fundamental difference. Now, whether political rights are important or social rights and economic rights are important, that is the main debate. Now, in this debate, both are equally important. Supreme Court has repeatedly said both are equally important, though fundamental rights are justiciable, DPSPs are non-justiciable, but that does not mean that one part of the Constitution or one provision of Constitution is superior to another provision of Constitution. Whenever any law is interpreted under judicial review, under the powers enjoyed by Supreme Court and High Court under Article 13, whenever that is done, that time the court keeps in mind both of these provisions, Part 3 as well as Part 4 of Constitution. Now, what are the problems in making DPSPs legally enforceable? First thing is the resources. We have a large population base. It will be impossible to meet the demands of everyone at the same time. That was the reason why makers of Constitution did not make DPSPs justiciable. They knew that resources with the country were limited, and as resource availability would improve, then government would be under pressure in the democratic system to make laws to enforce these DPSPs one by one. Second thing, we have a diverse country. And in a diverse country, the complications increase. We have a democracy. In democracy, different groups compete for the same resources. So it will be difficult to ensure that everyone gets the same access to resource at the same time. So government will have to enforce these DPSPs in a very gradual manner. Without fundamental rights, you cannot have, for example, rights to equality before law. If you do not have right to equality before law, if you do not have protection against discrimination, if you do not have equal opportunity in public employment, if you do not have protection against untouchability, if you do not have the freedoms guaranteed by Article 19, if you do not have protection against beggar or forced labor, if you do not have the right to practice your own religion, belief and practices, or right to save your cultural institutions, cultural practices, then without those rights, even social and economic empowerment would become meaningless. Social and economic empowerment becomes meaningful only when individuals or citizens have access to, have guarantee of a dignified life. Without dignified life, advancement is impossible or advancement becomes meaningless. So you have to analyze the provisions of both, importance of both, problems in making DPSP justiciable, and why fundamental rights have to be protected, have to be given equal pedestal, have to be given equal importance. You cannot say, okay, let's make DPSPs justiciable, let us leave fundamental rights out. That will defeat the very purpose of social and economic justice. So, write accordingly. Question number 3. Why does the Lok Sabha enjoy greater control over executive than Rajya Sabha in Indian parliamentary system, examined with reference to constitution provisions? So we have a parliamentary democracy. Lok Sabha is directly elected and Rajya Sabha members are indirectly elected. Lok Sabha is elected for a tenure of 5 years. Rajya Sabha is a permanent house. So members are retired, 1/3 members retire after every 2 years, or members are elected indirectly for a tenure of 6 years. Since Lok Sabha is directly elected, Lok Sabha members are directly accountable to the people of their constituency. They have to get votes from their constituency. They have to meet the people on ground directly. They represent a particular specific geographical area. Their responsibilities are more. Once their responsibilities are more, they have greater authority in parliamentary democracy. Rajya Sabha members represent a state. They do not represent any specific part of a state. They represent entire state. So person of city A or village A or town A cannot go to any Rajya Sabha member and say, oh, you are my representative and you have to do this for me. Because Rajya Sabha member does not represent any specific state, town or village. Any specific part of the state is not represented. So public pressure on members of Rajya Sabha is very, very limited. In fact, negligible. They do not get people's vote. They do not depend on people's vote. Lok Sabha members represent a specific constituency. Lok Sabha members are accountable to the people of their constituency. They have to go back to the people's court once again after 5 years to get their votes. So they have to work in accordance with the desire or the needs and aspirations of people. That's why Lok Sabha has greater authority. Lok Sabha has greater control over executive than Rajya Sabha. Now, what are the provisions? Let us see specific provisions. Article 75, Clause 3 says, Council of Ministers shall be collectively responsible to the House of People. House of People means Lok Sabha. So, Council of Ministers is accountable to Lok Sabha. It means if Lok Sabha desires, if Lok Sabha is not happy, then Lok Sabha can push out any Council of Ministers on any government anytime. The Council of Ministers is not accountable to Rajya Sabha. It is accountable to Lok Sabha. And Council of Ministers, they constitute the senior executive or the high executive order. These ministers, they constitute the senior executive. So Lok Sabha maintains control over ministers. Ministers formulate policies. Ministers implement the will of Parliament through those policies. That's why Lok Sabha has greater control over executive. The government of the day, the Council of Ministers of the day has to always enjoy the confidence of Lok Sabha. And in any case, if confidence is lost, the ministry or the government is booted out. That is the fulcrum, that is a fundamental platform on which parliamentary democracy operates. Look at some more. So Lok Sabha can pass or adopt no confidence motion. At times governments will have to seek confidence motion. Confidence motion is moved by the ruling party or the government. No confidence motion is moved by the opposition for the same purpose. Purpose is same, but whether it is confidence motion or no confidence motion depends on who initiates it. Adjournment motion. During discussion, members of Lok Sabha can seek adjournment, can force the government to kind of bow down in front of the house. Cut motion during budget. So if cut motion is passed, that is a public censor, that is a censor of the government that we are not happy with your policy and you do not have our confidence. Censor motions. All these motions are available to Lok Sabha. These motions are not available to Rajya Sabha. So Lok Sabha keeps control, effective control on the activities of the government or Council of Ministers or the executive. So these are the references of constitution and these are the parliamentary practices. These ensure that there is effective control of Lok Sabha on the executive or the government of the day. Question number 4. Indian polity is federal in character with strong unitary features. Examine this statement with reference to constitution provisions that confer greater powers on union government as compared to the states. Article 1 of Indian Constitution says that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. The term union was used very consciously by the makers of Indian Constitution because they did not want to give impression that Indian unity is a result of some kind of agreement, some kind of understanding, some kind of voluntary association. India is not the result of voluntary association of political units, the way it is a case in America, USA. USA has 50 states and these 50 states have come together voluntarily. They were not together before the emergence of USA. Before, let's say, American Revolution of 1776 or drafting of Constitution in 1787, there was no USA. USA was formed by the delegates of American Congress when they decided to fight together against British colonial rule. So 13 of those states came together and slowly more states joined. Today, American Union or USA has 50 states. American polity is federal in character because that's the result of voluntary association. Indian unity is not the result of voluntary association. To ensure that right masses was given to the people of states, the governments in states, the makers of constitution carefully discussed this issue and they decided to use the term union in Article 1 of the Constitution. The term union is used in Article 1 of the Constitution. Indian political system is federal in its spirit. The makers of Constitution knew that there should be a federal relationship. There should be autonomy with the states in reasonable manner within limits, and there should be a balanced relationship between the powers of center and the powers of the state. There should be a reasonable distribution of resources so that at both levels the governments could do their best to fulfill the desire and the needs of people. So these things you have to keep in mind, and then you can analyze the provisions of Constitution. Let us see. What are the unitary features? Firstly, let's see what are the federal features here. Why do we say, or how can you say that Indian polity is federal in character? We have a written constitution. A written constitution is an essential feature of a federal political relationship. We have the division of powers between center and states through the provisions of Constitution. The subjects on which center is to legislate under normal conditions, the subjects on which the state government is to legislate under normal conditions are well defined in Constitution. So we have three lists: union list, state list, and a concurrent list on which both can make law subject to the superiority of the central law. So we have elements of federalism. The Supreme Court is also a federal court because this takes into account, or this deals with the issues related to center and states, center and one state, or center and multiple states, as well as issues between the states or two or more states. So Supreme Court is also a federal court. All these things indicate that Indian polity has federal elements. This is supposed to function in a federal manner in terms of relationship between center and the states. But it has strong unitary measures. What are these? Unequal division of legislative powers. Have a look. Union list has 97 subjects. The state list has 66 subjects. The concurrent list is 47 subjects. So 7th schedule of Indian Constitution has these three lists. And the subjects in union list are more than the subjects in state list. A state government or a state legislature can make a law only on the subjects of a state list. Union government or central government makes law here. Union law prevails in concurrent list subjects, and union government can make law on a matter of a state list also under emergency or under specific conditions. So there are conditions when Rajya Sabha can authorize the parliament to make a law on a matter of a state list or in emergency times. So unequal division of legislative powers, this indicates that center is more powerful or union government is more powerful than the state government. Residuary powers, Article 248 says that those subjects which are not mentioned in any of the three lists will be dealt by or will be handled by the central government. The residuary powers lie with the center. Financial control, central government has control or more control on resources. State governments also have power to tax. There are state taxes, but the central taxes provide much greater amount of resource. Emergency provisions in emergency times, whether 352 or 356, failure of constitutional machinery in a state, 352, war, external aggression, or 360, financial emergency. In case of emergency, the center becomes all-powerful. Central directives have to be followed by state governments. Role of governor is also very controversial nowadays. It has been controversial always since the very beginning because the governor acts as an agent of central government in a state capital. Governor is appointed by central government or by the president. Of course, president does not do anything on his own. President follows whatever council minister says. So council ministers or the central government appoints governors, and governors hold office during the pleasure of the president. So governors can be removed anytime, so they have to keep serving the interest of center from beginning to end. Constitution amendments can be made by parliament or central government. All India Services Article 312 also ensures that there is a greater effective control of center on state apparatus. These are strong unitary features in Indian Constitution. So these unitary features ensure that there is a greater control of center, there is a bias in favor of union government or unitary measures. So all these you have to refer, all these you have to mention in your answer to say, okay, we have a federal polity in spirit. Article 1 says India, that is Bharat, shall be union. Why does that say so? And what are the examples of unitary provisions? Of course, we have federal elements also. Question number 5. The 73rd Constitution Amendment Act was aimed at democratizing grassroots governance. So this is about the 73rd Constitution Amendment Act enacted in 1992. Enactment was in 1992. It came into force in April 1993. So that's why whenever you refer, some sources will say it's 1992 and some will say 1993 because it was enacted in 1992 but came into force in April 1993. Discuss the provisions made for ensuring the better representation of especially disadvantaged groups in Panchayat Raj institutions. So what do you mean by these disadvantaged groups? Socially disadvantaged groups. Here you have to see SCs, STs, backward classes, maybe vulnerable segments, women. So how are these members or how are these segments of population protected through special provisions related to their representation in Panchayat and municipal bodies, Panchayati Raj institution particularly? Let us see. Constitution backing Article 243D. Article 243 Clause D provides for reservation of seats for different sections of population in local bodies. Reservation of seats are there for SCs and STs in the proportion of their population. So seats are reserved in the proportion of the population of SCs and STs in local bodies or in panchayats. And within that reservation of SC/ST, there is 1/3 reservation for women of those categories. So 33% of the total seats are reserved for SC/STs, women, from the seats allotted to SC/STs. So there is internal reservation for women within the reservation given to or allotted to SCs and STs. Some states have given reservation to OBCs also. So OBC reservation is not a common thing, but some state governments, you can use those references also. That state governments have given reservation to OBCs in some cases. Reservation of post of chairman, not only the members of local bodies are supposed to be having diverse representation of different sections of population, the chairmen also have to be from those diverse segments of population. So Article 243D Clause 4 says, offices of chairperson at all the three levels, village, block and the district, have to be reserved in accordance with the ratio of the population for SC/STs. Rotation of reserved seats. So suppose seat A is reserved this time, next time seat B will be reserved so that everywhere the SC/ST members, the women, could be empowered. Empowerment has to be distributed. Empowerment has to be sustained. Empowerment cannot be only in particular geographical areas or particular segments of a constituency. To ensure that empowerment is equally distributed, there is provision of rotation of reserved seats. So these are the provisions of Constitution that ensure that representation of socially disadvantaged groups in panchayat bodies is there in the ratio of the population in that area. Question number 6. In the light of contemporary debates on executive accountability and constitutional morality, examine the necessity of placing limitations on the powers of government through Constitution. So basically, what is the need of constitutional provisions to ensure accountability? What is accountability? The principle of accountability says that every holder of public office shall be accountable to the law of the land for his actions as well as for his inactions. If actions are taken, why was that particular, or why were those particular actions taken by that officer or that holder of public office or that public servant? And if action was supposed to be taken and action was not taken, why did the public servant remain passive, remained inactive? That is also part of accountability. So accountability is of actions, accountability is also of inactions. Without accountability, there can be no democracy. Because democracy means the government of the people, a government for the people, government by the people, of the people, for the people, by the people. So if democracy is to be maintained, and you know that every citizen cannot participate directly in policy formulation, directly in policy implementation, directly in resource distribution. So citizens participate in policy making, in decision making only through their representatives. And these representatives must be accountable for their actions as well as inactions. First accountability is to the law, second accountability is the supreme law, that is Constitution, and third accountability is to the people, those who are the source of the authority of a state. So what is the need? Examine the necessity. So what is the need? Democracy cannot survive without accountability. A democratic political system requires multiple levels of accountability, requires transparency, requires enlightenment of public so that people know why was this decision taken or why was not that decision taken. Without accountability, there will be no democracy. The difference between dictatorship, autocracy and democracy is accountability. Accountability requires transparency, so accountability and transparency are the two pillars on which a democracy stands. Now, without accountability, democracy cannot survive. Let's see further. Is it possible for a democracy to exist without empowering its citizens? No. If citizens do not have information, if citizens do not know why was this decision taken, if citizens do not know why were these resources allocated for this particular head, why were the other heads not properly financed or not properly paid attention to, how can citizens have a dignified life? How can the citizens have control over the functioning of government? So citizens have to have control. Why limitations of the government powers are necessary? Because it is necessary to prevent authoritarianism. If there is no accountability, there will be dictatorship. Dictatorship means no accountability to anybody. The will of the head of the state becomes a law. That cannot happen in a democracy. Because in a democracy, law is the expression of common will. Law is the desire or the interest or the demand of the common people. Upholding constitutional morality without upholding the norms, constitutional norms and values, there can be no democracy. And accountability ensures safeguards of fundamental rights. If fundamental rights are violated, and fundamental rights cannot exist if there is no accountability. Article 32 enforces that accountability. Article 226, the powers of high courts under Article 226 and Article 226 and powers of Supreme Court under Article 32 to issue writs. Mandamus, I command. So I command you to do your duty. That's a writ of mandamus that is issued by High Courts or Supreme Court whenever any citizen approaches the court in case of violation of his fundamental rights. Or if anybody occupies the office, Supreme Court or High Court can say, quo warranto, show me the authority through which you are occupying this public office. So quashing of judgment of a lower court if the judgment is being delivered by violating the jurisdiction, certiorari, or prohibition is stopping if you are undertaking, if any judicial authority or semi-judicial authority is undertaking any decision, any case that can be taken away. These are the instruments of accountability. Without accountability, these things are impossible. Mechanism to limit executive powers. We have principle of separation of powers. So there are three important pillars of a state: executive, legislative, and judiciary, so that they can keep a check on each other. Article 13 provides for judicial review. So if any of the actions of executive or legislature violates the provisions of Part 3 of Constitution or violates the fundamental rights guaranteed to citizens, that particular action is subjected to judicial review. Federalism, powers are distributed between center and the state. And independent institutions, we have independent judiciary, we have election commission, we have CVC, we have entities like CBI, which keep a close watch on the functioning of public servants. So all these are instruments of accountability, and they ensure that there is healthy democracy in India, because without accountability there can be no democracy, there will be dictatorship, and dictatorship will take away everything which citizens enjoy through the provisions of Constitution. Question number 7. Discuss how the credibility and moral authority of the constitutions framers contributed to the legitimacy and acceptance of the Indian Constitution among people. Now look at the framing of Constitution 1946 to say 1950 or 1949. Some provisions of Constitution came into force in November 1949, and some others or most of the provisions came into force on 26th of January 1950. So December 1946 to January 1950, this was a period during which Constitution was drafted. Now suppose if you and me draft a Constitution and we ask people to follow, will they follow? They will not follow, because you and me do not have that kind of credibility, that kind of authority, that kind of trust the people, that kind of popularity among the people, that they will trust us that, oh, our order is the law, our will is the law, and they should follow. They will not follow. Here, the makers of Constitution were the great leaders. They were the makers of modern India. They fought against British rule throughout their life. Look at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, chairman of drafting committee. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a hero for the vast majority of Indian population. And if the hero was doing something, everyone was bound to follow. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a great intellectual. He was a great leader. Other members, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, they were the great leaders. They carried great moral authority. Moral authority is more important than even the legal and constitutional authority, because people can violate, people can challenge your constitutional authority, people can challenge your legal authority, but people do not challenge your moral authority, your conduct, your reputation. Your standing on the issue so far gives people confidence that whatever you will be doing, that will be for their larger benefit. So, the makers of Constitution were great leaders. Their ethical moral conduct, their mass appeal, their fight against British rule, their knowledge of the law, their commitment to the well-being of the people, their commitment to the transformation of India into a great nation, all those things ensure that people respected them, and their credibility manifested or flowed through the provisions of Constitution, or provisions of Constitution were mere extensions of their credibility. That's why Constitution became the supreme law of the land. Constitution is respected and we have constitutional supremacy. Even the Supreme Court, even the legislature, even the executive, all have to function within the boundaries of Supreme Court, within the boundaries of Constitution, and no one can violate. That power came from, not from the British rule, not from the Independence of India Act, but from the moral, ethical conduct of the makers of Constitution. So write about them, write about their achievements, and that's how public was having full faith in their actions. In the light of ongoing debates on its electoral reforms and demand of more inclusive representation, critically examine whether India should move from first past the post system, FPTP system. The system, suppose you have number of candidates. The system we follow in state legislative assembly elections, in Lok Sabha elections. So suppose you have, say, 100 candidates. There can be any number of candidates. There is no maximum limit on the number of candidates who can participate or that can participate in election. So there are, suppose, 100 candidates, and a particular candidate gets 2%, others 99 gets, say, less than 1%, equal something around 1%. Even with 2% votes, theoretically, that candidate can win election in first past the post system. Most of the MLAs and MPs of Lok Sabha, they win their seats with 30 to 35% of the votes. Most of them get votes in this range. With the mere support of around 1/3 of the population, 2/3 of population did not vote for them. It's not population, again, 2/3 of voters, adult population did not vote for them, still they win the seat. That is what happens in first past the post system. So the public representative is not necessarily representing majority of population. Forget about representing all. In a democracy, representing all is practically impossible. Because even if there are two candidates and another candidate gets only 1% of votes and the winning candidate gets 99% of votes, that's a phenomenal victory. That generally never happens. But in that case also, the winning candidate does not get all the votes. So in a democracy, in a parliamentary democracy, in a constitutional system, it's practically impossible for anyone to get 100% of the votes. But if somebody wins, theoretically, again, this doesn't happen. This is another extreme case. Generally, the winning candidate gets votes in this range. Sometimes 25, sometimes 28%, and very rarely crossing 50, 55 or 60% of the votes. That is what is a first past the post system. In proportional representation, the winner has to get more than 50% of the votes. Again, more than 50% of votes, not 100% of the votes. So there are multiple rounds of voting, and whenever one candidate gets more than 50% of the votes, then only election process is stopped. Then only the candidate is declared elected. So that is the difference between the two fundamental election systems. What are the issues with FPTP? Distortion of popular will. Because a candidate with just, say, 30-35% of the votes generally gets elected. It means this candidate is not representing around, or at least around, 65% of the voters. Or you can say theoretically that 65% of voters were against him. They were not against him, but they were not pro him. Still he is getting, or she is getting, elected. Marginalization of smaller parties. So there are smaller parties Those who have base, let's say they get only 5% of the votes or 7% of the votes, they cannot win even a single seat. Sometimes a party gets 18-20% of the votes in a state election and they get 0 seat, or in Lok Sabha they get 0 seat. Because you can keep getting 15, 18, 20% votes and other person gets 30, 35% votes and the party of 30, 35% gets most of the seats. Underrepresentation minority. So if a minority community, minority could be religious or cultural or lingual or any kind of minority, if that minority community has say 20-25% of the votes, then this will not affect such candidates much, because their intention is not to get 100% of the votes. The intention is to get only 35-40% of the votes. That's it. And they win the election. So there are problems with first past the post system, but there are arguments in favor of PR, also proportional representation, that says, okay, fairer representation is there. Nobody feels left out. It strengthens democracy because the winning candidate will get more than 50% of the votes. And greater inclusion, because now exclusion of minorities or specific segments of population will not be practically possible. But there are problems. What are the limitations? It weakens the constituency link, because in first past the post system, voters are directly voting. They know from whom they are voting. But in proportional representation, the voters will have to give their preferences, first preference to this, second preference to this, third preference to this. So first votes are counted, then second votes are counted. That creates complications. Potential for political instability, because even 10% of the votes can fetch some seats. So multiple parties will emerge along the lines of ideology, along the lines of language or other identities, and it becomes very, very difficult for any one party to win majority to give a stable government. Complexity. Fringe elements. The fringe elements, those who represent not the popular will but will of the small percentage of population, they also become very important. They also become very dominant and they can distort the result of election. So there are limitations for both sides. And since implementation of FPTP is easier, since FPTP is kind of ensuring direct connect between the winning candidate and the voters, so this is followed in India. This is a feature of parliamentary democracy in most countries of the world. So this is how you have to understand. Question number 9. In the context of growing concerns over executive overreach and the declining role of legislative scrutiny, examine why it's essential for the legislature to effectively control executive in a parliamentary democracy. So what is the issue of decline of legislative scrutiny? Look at the system of whip. The system of whip ensures that all the members of parliament, all the members of a state legislature, they vote along party lines. The MLAs and MPs do not have freedom to use their conscience and vote as per their own understanding of the issue. They have to vote along with the party. They have to follow the party line while voting when the whip is issued. In case they do not follow, anti-defection law provisions get active. They can be thrown out of the house, their membership can be taken away, and they can be barred even for re-election. So depending on the issues involved. So legislative scrutiny is going down because once a party forms government, and if this is not a coalition government, if it is a single party government, then the whip will ensure that everyone follows whatever the cabinet has approved. Now, how the laws are made, a particular minister, a particular cabinet minister proposes a law, prepares a draft. That draft goes to the cabinet discusses it, accepts or rejects it. If it is having the kind of support of Prime Minister, cabinet will accept it again, because if the party in power has a strong government, then Prime Minister is very powerful and every minister has to follow the line of the Prime Minister in case there is a disagreement. This takes the form of bill, introduced in House, upper house, lower house, and then every member of that party whose government is there, whose council minister is there at that time, has to follow. So legislative entity or legislatures cannot really do much to make the government change provisions. They can just discuss, they can just cry foul, and they have to vote along party lines, and then whoever is the ruling party gets its way. So in such a situation, we have to ensure that control of legislature on executive is effective. At least discussions should be elaborate. At least the issue should be highlighted. At least the public should be made to know what is being done and why it is being done, because no party that is in power will like to lose the forthcoming election. So role of scrutiny, role of debates, role of discussions, role of voting, role of kind of suggesting motions, different kind of motions on the floor of house, that becomes important. And without those motions, Parliament cannot really exercise its mandate. Parliament cannot really serve the interests of the people. So write all these things. Question number 10, examine the major sources of provisions of Indian Constitution. How have these diverse sources contribute to the addressing the complexities and plurality of diverse society like India? Indian Constitution was drafted by using the borrowed wisdoms. So this famous term is borrowed wisdom. Indian Constitution represents or is a reflection of borrowed wisdom. The makers of Indian Constitution went through existing constitutions and the constitutions which were used by countries in the past. They studied them in detail to ensure that they were producing the best document possible under those circumstances. They did not want to leave anything to chance. That's why it took almost 3 years for the makers of Constitution to prepare this document. And this document could be prepared within again this period of around 3 years because of extensive borrowings. The Constitution of USA, Constitution of France, Constitution of Britain, Japan, South Africa, Germany, all were reviewed and provisions were taken from different constitutions. Let us see some issues. How have these adaptations or borrowings affected Constitution? The Constitution has become flexible to handle a plural society because if diverse experiences were incorporated, if we adopted the chapter of fundamental rights from USA, the concept of DPSP from Irish Constitution, then we start creating a diverse system, and this is going to meet the needs of a plural or diversified society. Protection of rights, we have chapter on fundamental rights adopted from or influenced by Bill of Rights of America. Socio-economic justice, DPSP's Irish Constitution. Then we have a strong center with federal flexibility. Many elements have been adopted from Canada. Democratic participation, British conventions, Japanese conventions, concept of liberty, equality, fraternity. All these things have been incorporated to ensure that Constitution fulfills the needs and requirements of different segments of population. Without this borrowed wisdom, it would have been practically impossible to have such a phenomenally successful constitution that our makers could do, they could achieve. So dear students, this was discussion of your test paper of Indian polity and governance. I hope you have noted down the main points and always incorporate these things which I have highlighted, the provisions of constitution, the verdicts of Supreme Court, specific reference to Supreme Court cases, so that your answer has weight. So in case you have still further any difficulty, you need any further help, you can always come and see me here in office, or you can write me mail, or you can connect me through teacher support. I'm always here to help you. So keep working hard, keep writing better and better answers. God bless you. All the very best.